let's talk about Brian Pillman.
Sure.
Because also that's the debut, and that's the one that I've seen the screener of. Every time you do one of these shows, I mean, I probably won't break down in tears over the plane ride from hell episode or, the steroid trial episode. But every time you do one of these shows about somebody that I've known personally, at one point I end up having to pause it and walk away. And this, in the Pillman episode, it's 2 hours. There was a couple of those spots, and most of them, all of them, really centered on the comments that Brian Jr. made. And I'm not going to spoil anything for anybody, or there's no way I could deliver it the way it was said. But it really got to me. Especially Brian was younger than I was when my dad passed away, and that's hard anyway. But for him to be left in the situation that he was in after his dad passed away is probably the worst part about it. And hearing him describe some of those things, he's breaking down and I had to break down. I mean, you can read about these stories all day, but when you actually hear the family members speak and see their emotions, I think that's what makes these programs different from just the standard wrestling documentary that, gets a few talking heads in the business.
Yeah, I think, especially with this story, it's like, we always had a huge interest in Brian Pillman for the show because, the main, I don't know, the things for us that we want to explore with this show is always kind of where the character stops and the real person takes over, or vice versa. Sort of that blurred lines aspect is kind of the most fascinating area to really dig into for us in this show. And I think that's what really makes it interesting to non-fans. And so when we were looking into this story, and I think it was around last season where I had got a copy of Crazy Like a Fox, the book by Liam O'Rourke, which is just amazing. And that just really detailed a lot of what was happening, outside of the wrestling side of his story. And that really opened my eyes. And then when we started filming it, we didn't think it would be a 2-hour show, to be honest, which is crazy in hindsight, because as soon as we started putting it all together and we interviewed Brian Jr. especially and the other family members and started to realize the story doesn't end with Brian's passing. There's a whole other, even more than an epilogue, there's a whole other couple of chapters there and of their whole story. And that to us really was like, wow, we need the full 2 hours to tell this story. And yeah, Brian Jr. is just so amazing in that episode, and just what that family's had to go through, and of course just the complexity of the relationships between everybody in that family. And I think that really comes through. And and kudos to Brian Jr. for, even though those relationships are very complicated to this day, he still, recognized and was advocating that all members of his family do have a voice in the show, because it is important, and I think that really kind of makes it something more than just kind of a wrestling story.
Well, Brittany, at one point, she makes the comment and it just hits you in the face that by the time she was 2 years old, neither one of her biological parents were still alive.
I think she was like 7. Yeah.
Was she a 7? Whatever. But, young enough. Yeah. But the point is, all of a sudden here she's by the changing relationships, and then the new boyfriend comes in. She's living with 2 completely different parents.
I know.
Than who she started out with. And, Brian was so young and left without his dad there. And I'll tell you one thing. You guys, I don't know whether you showed restraint or it just didn't fit and you didn't have to do it anyway. Because I'm sure I know that there's probably some stories that some people told you during this taping about Melanie Pillman that with details that you could have just played 1 or 2 of them. And people would have been after her in the town square with pitchforks and trying to burn her at the stake.
Right.
And that is that's the impression you're going to get from the program anyway when you watch it. But you guys exercised restraint in letting the viewer have that reaction on their own instead of all the information that you could have given them that would reinforce that opinion. She is the heel of the piece, whether intentionally or not. And everybody that was around Brian, in his life at that time probably feels the same way. But I mean, kudos to her for at least, being there. I mean, the years have not been kind, and this is a case of going literally from penthouse to the outhouse. But she did it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm very happy that we were able to get her, for this, because I mean, a lot of it is, her story as well. And, it goes back to what Jason and I wanted to do with this show from the very beginning. Dark Side of the Ring is the name. That's the name of the show. But really, it is the human side of the ring, as we've talked about before. It's really showing the complexities of not just the wrestlers, but the family members around these subjects, and how complicated life is. It's not so simple or black and white. And I think with this season in particular, with this episode and with some of the other ones, the Nick Gage one comes to mind too, is it's like we're really kind of capturing a snapshot of a story in that present moment. That story might not be over. Like a Brian Jr. story isn't definitely over. Right. It's just starting. And same with Melanie and her journey to reconcile and to come together with her family, if that's possible, So that was something we really wanted to show. And there are some things where I feel like there are semi-double standards in their story as well. I mean, Brian wasn't the most faithful husband either, and so it's kind of like we wanted to just show all of that. We wanted to show that, this was a wild marriage, and, some and we wanted just to show the real drama behind all that.
Yeah. And seeing the relationship between Brian Pillman Jr. and his mom today, I think that's something a lot of people could probably relate to that have like fractured relationships, like with their parents and loved ones. And so to kind of see that honesty, between the two and how they are, still currently working out their relationship today, I think is pretty powerful to see.
That was, and I will say that without trying to spoil anything, just when Brian says, well, what am I supposed to do? Hate my mother or, all my life or whatever. Right. That's heart wrenching in itself. And you mentioned the Gage thing, the bank addicted drug robber. I love you guys, but I wish you wouldn't take forays outside professional wrestling and validate these garbage wrestling goofs by calling them professional wrestlers. But I'm sure it'll be an interesting story. Who else is stupid enough to rob a bank with no mask on camera when you're a public figure and then go to the casino in Jersey with your winnings? But anyway,
did you see the episode somehow?
No, I had his number as soon as he walked through the door.
Okay.
We've heard all those stories, but anyway,